So I'm Reverend Dr. Gabriel Salguero, president of the National Latino Evangelical Coalition and pastor of the Lamb's Church in New York City. For some time, the Hispanic Evangelical community, as part of the faith leadership community, has engaged in criminal justice. I think we come at it kind of from the grassroots. Many of our members in the Hispanic Evangelical community, Pew says we're close to 8 million Hispanic Evangelicals in the United States of America, of the 50.4 Hispanics in the U.S. And we're disproportionately represented in prisons and in juvenile detention homes, right? So a lot of the children of our parishioners, are ex-offenders and people who are trying to reintegrate into society. So we get to have a real hands-on view, right? These are not numbers, these are real names and real families. And for us, the faith community, one of the biggest challenges is people trying to change their lives, but they've been marked forever and they're permanently labeled as a person who can't contribute to society. So the Hispanic Evangelical community does several things. We have prison ministries where we try to prepare men and women who have been incarcerated for reintegration and a successful reintegration into society. Number two, we minister to the mothers and fathers and children, something like called Angel Tree. What happens when your parents are incarcerated and you're in the larger society without their love and their nurture? So we kind of become the surrogate family. And what we have found is if you give people a second chance, these particularly nonviolent offenders, young offenders, people who made mistakes in their lives, and give them an opportunity to be reintegrated, you empower them, you tap into their greatest angels. We found that they're some of the best contributors of society. They're some of the best members of our congregation because they understand what it means to be changed and to help other people to change. Let me tell you why I do this. My father was in the juvenile detention system. He was addicted to heroin as a young man since his early teens. He comes from a highly dysfunctional family. My grandfather, his father, was an alcoholic, a war veteran, all of the kind of PTSD issues, and he's one of 11 children, most of which have been incarcerated. He was transformed. He's been clean for over 45 years, and he was given a second chance, a third chance, really. My father's now my pastor. He's my mentor. He put 4 of us through college and graduate school. He has started drug rehab centers across the country. He mentors young men, mostly young men, coming out of prison, right? So I know firsthand that we can do better and we can change the lives of young men and women or older men and women who've been incarcerated, who've made a mistake, because that's my father's story. Half the job is saying this policy is broken because it doesn't change a thing. It just continues to expand and expand. So we'll have more prisons and less schools. That doesn't make sense, right? But then it's saying, if this is broken, here's what faith leaders bring. They bring a worldview, they bring mentorship, they become surrogate families, they become that whole kind of social network that's a faith safety net for these men and women who've for multiple reasons have fallen through the cracks or through bad decisions, and we can help them alongside of them, right? It's not this kind of paternalistic, hey, we're here to save you. It's like, hey, I'll put it this way. Somebody once asked Michelangelo, he said to him, hey, how did you create David out of this massive rock? Everybody said it was a boulder. And Michelangelo says, I'm paraphrasing clearly, he says, David was always in there. I just pulled him out, you see? And the problem, I think, is the way we see people. And faith leaders bring a particular worldview of how you see people. Are they a problem or a promise? Some people see rocks. We see David. And we're trying to pull him out, right? So when people saw my dad, young man, broken system, always be a drug dealer, once a drug dealer, always a drug dealer, once a drug, right? But the faith community said, hey, this guy's a promise. He's a leader. He's leading young men in an underground business, right? If we're able to change that, give it a different twist, you can't imagine what he can do. The second thing is, many of our people who are incarcerated are wrestling with mental illness. The power of spirituality, right? As a Christian, I would say Christian spirituality, to help people navigate the complex and profound challenges of mental illness. It cannot be understated, right? Good faith, faith at its best, is to help to say, hey, do we want to just continue to incarcerate thousands of men and women who are struggling with mental illness and substance abuse? Or do we want to help them navigate these realities because they're created in the image of God in a way that heals society? I think that if I was in the room when they were recrafting the crime bill's 20 years old this year. So here's what I would tell the president or Congress. I would say, first, be bipartisan. Stop with the inertia. Right? Let's solve problems. Let's stop creating this. Secondly, I would say for nonviolent offenders, we need to have the capacity to not disenfranchise them permanently. They have to have a way to be re-enfranchised, right? If they're juvenile, nonviolent juvenile, I think we need to talk about them having their record expunged. I mean, that's a cross, pun intended, to bear their whole lives, right? And so crosses can only be bared for a certain amount of time. The emotional, intellectual, and economic burden that has on people and their families. People have to get married, right? We need to talk about expunging the records of juvenile, nonviolent offenders. Thirdly, I think we need to look at mandatory sentencing, right? For low-level drug offenses. I mean, so a 17-year-old kid or an 18-year-old kid, you're going to have this long mandatory sentencing rather than having him or her look at the decision process, the things that led them to that, and bringing kind of this systemic resource, right? Because at the end of the day, it's the moral calculus. The moral calculus is too high. It is a deficit in the moral calculus. And frankly, I'm opposed to the death penalty. You cannot reverse an error at that level. You know, there was a report called Irreversible Error. Since the death penalty was instituted, over 140 people have been executed who have later been exonerated. Well, it's no good once you're in the grave to be exonerated. I think the United States of America is one of the few countries, together with something like Iraq and other places, that have the death penalty. No, especially since it's not meted out in ways that are equitable. As an evangelical, as a follower of Jesus, who, by the way, suffered capital punishment, I can't bear it.